As you know, the title of the panel is Amiri Baraka, First Fires in the Black Arts Movement in the South. And this is a lot of things to try to cover, but because we have a set of people who are broadly experienced in many of the areas, I think that between the three of our colleagues, we'll be able to address all of those situations. I'm not going to go through individual introductions of folks. In your packet or in your program, you have the background information on each, but just let me say that this is a special panel for me and a special moment because these folks have produced work that constitute kind of the canon, the beginning canon in African American studies and diaspora studies for that matter. And at least for those of us who came through that first wave of the field, these names stand out very large. Jim Smethurst, who is a professor in Afro-American Studies at the W.B. Du Bois Department. I won't have to say this but once, because John is also chair of that department, stepped down, did some other work, and then came back. And of course, many of you are familiar with Sister Sonia Sanchez. She's been here at the Stone Center on a number of occasions, both as Stone lecturer and also as the first artistic act that the Stone Center featured when the building opened in 2004. So she has a very, very important place with us. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and go into the questions, and we'll let her come right up as soon as we begin. But I do want to point out, if I can borrow your book, John, this is an important new book, SOS, Calling All Black People a Black Arts Movement Reader, that is edited by our three guests today. And I'm sure that later today you'll get an opportunity that we have some copies that will be here if you desire to get them purchased, to purchase one, and also to have it signed by our guests. Okay, let's, if we can, go right into the first question. And that question, as it was listed, is that it's not often that we hear a discussion and analysis of the regional aspects of the Black Arts Movement, particularly the contribution of the Southern branch. Taking a cue from a section from James's The Black Arts Movement, would you still feel that it's important to look at this regionally? And would you also take a moment to speak a bit about historically black schools and black student organizing as a generative force in the Southern Black Arts Movement? And also, because many folks from the South migrated north and established homes there, can you talk a little bit about that particular dynamic? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, it's a big question. I'm thinking about it. Well, a few things. I mean, as far as the South goes, I mean, it comes to be an incredibly important part of the Black Arts Movement, as Sonia and Amiri Baraka's comrade in the Black Arts Repertory Theater and School, Skia Touré, said that the Southern Black Cultural Alliance, which was one of the main organizations of the Black Arts era, which covered almost the entire South, was probably the most successful regional grassroots Black Arts organization during the entire period. So, and I think it's fair to say that not only was the Black Arts Movement all over the South, but it was, there's probably no other region in the United States where it was institutionalized to the same degree that it was here. More about that in 1 second. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible so I can get out of the way for my fellow panelists. I mean, one thing you can say is that some of the prehistory, if you will, of Black Arts, you wouldn't exactly call them Black Arts organizations, although they become Black Arts organizations or morph into them or influence them. A start down here, even before the Black Arts Repertory Theater and School. I mean, the Free Southern Theater, first at Tougaloo, college in Mississippi, and then shortly thereafter in New Orleans, predates the Black Arts Repertory Theater and School. Now, it's true that when it started, I think you would call it a civil rights theater. It was an integrated theater, but nonetheless, it morphs actually under the influence of people like Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez and so on, under the influence of things like Dutchman, slave ship, and so forth, as well as The Bronx is Next and by Sonia Sanchez, towards a Black Arts Theater, and eventually morphs into what's called Black Arts South, that's already here. The historically black schools are important for a lot of reasons. One thing is that was the epicenter of the black student movement, which is obviously in the rise of SNCC, which is obviously important to the rise of black power and black arts on many levels, especially in Atlanta. New Orleans is a little different because that's core territory, but nonetheless it has an impact there too, and definitely in Mississippi. But also because these schools, although the administrations aren't always friendly towards black arts, black studies, black power, it's somewhat variable. Nonetheless, they're willing to hire people who are very important in these things. They're willing to hire Tony K, especially in Atlanta, Spelman, say, is willing to hire Tony K. Bombara. They're willing to hire A.B. Spelman, eventually willing to hire Pearl Clay. So these are quite important. So that's some of the foreground of it. I mean, you can say a lot as far as Amiri Baraka go. The other thing I'll say is that if you're talking about a black nation in the United States, here, I mean, pretty much you can't ideologically have an idea of a black nation given the history of the African American community here, or nation in the United States, and the demographics of it without the South being in there. I mean, in a sense, it's the epicenter of what many organizations and black power organizations and so on considered to be, where in this hemisphere, at least in what we think of as the polity of the United States, of where the black nation was. I mean, it's not, even though a lot of the leaders of, say, the Republic of New Africa come from Michigan, or actually Philly then, the Obadili brothers, to Detroit, they're not talking about having the, Kush up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a pretty empty place. Right. But it's in the Mississippi Delta. All right. So there's that aspect, and then as a practical aspect, thinking about Amiri Baraka and part of the influence of Amiri Baraka. One of the things that happens down here, and I feel a little embarrassed saying this with Kamosi Woodard in the room, since he's one of the, he's probably the best scholar of this. But when the first CAP convention happens in Atlanta, which is in '70, which is obviously, has Baraka's imprint is all over that. When they come to the decision, which is also reflected in the Gibson campaign in Newark, of making the election of black officials a priority, of that kind of trying to establish that kind of black political power as a way of moving towards black self-determination, a black nation. As Kalama Yasalam said, who was also there to me once, he says, well, the demographics of the black community in the United States, of African American communities in the United States, sort of dictated that once you've come to that conclusion that that's a priority, a lot of the focus has to be in the South, because that's where black people are in the main. I mean, sure, there are some cities like Newark and Detroit and Gary and even Cleveland where there are large enough black communities that are majorities or near majorities, but more than 50% of black people in the United States still live in the South. If you want to elect a whole lot of black officials. If you want that kind of black political power, it has to be down here, because that's where the people are. And one of the things that really comes out of that to some degree, which is important in the black arts movement and the institutionalization of the black arts movement, and it also relates to historically black schools because of the concentration at University Center, is the election of Maynard Jackson a few years later in Atlanta, who decides to be the culture mayor. And there we have the black arts movement, the neighborhood arts center, people like Tony K. Bombara, folks like Iban Dooley, folks like Pearl Clegg, Andrea Fry, the theater person, actually people like Spike Lee and Samuel L. Jackson come out of this to a certain degree, though they don't stay in Atlanta. Ed Spriggs, when he comes to Atlanta and so forth, becomes institutionalized there to an unprecedented degree, which is why Atlanta, you could argue, is the center of black art in the United States, and not, say,
Jim,
New York City.
Can I ask you to put a pin in that right there? We're going to come back to that.
Okay, but I just say,
Yeah.
So that, I'm sorry, like I said, it's a big question, but I think that it's important to understand that Amiri Baraka is very important in terms of how that all develops, and that's, I think, an unsung part of his legacy.
That's a good way to sort of establish a context to go forward. Sister Sonia, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd like, Brother Woody, are you here? Oh, he said last night, can you tell the joke that you once told me some years ago, and I can't remember it all. And I said, yeah, I'll start the program with the joke. It is a curse word, so please, do not get upset, all right? But my dad, who was a great griot, used to tell me so many stories when I was a child. And, we had no time to listen to it, because we were always ready to go out someplace. The joy, however, is that you have children, and then you go and you stand in the doorway, you listen to your father tell the same things to your children, to his grandchildren. You go, yeah, right. And he tells a story about the first black pilot in America that happened in a place called New York City, and at LaGuardia Airport, and people would get on the plane to fly to L.A., and as they passed by, the cockpit doors open. They looked in, there's a Negro at the controls, and people sit down. They're very much upset about that. They stop pushing the bell. At that time they called the flight attendants a stewardess. They said, stewardess, is that a Negro in the cockpit? And she says, just a minute, calm down. She pushed all the buttons, and she goes in. She said, Jim, I told you needed to close the door. Now everyone has seen you, and they're very, very upset about this. And he says, don't worry, Janie. I will go on the intercom, and I will tell them, my story. So he goes on. He said, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Jack Jones. I am your pilot for our trip to L.A. But before I begin, let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I am a graduate of Harvard University. I'm also a graduate of Yale University. I'm also a graduate of MIT. I'm also a graduate of Oxford University. And during World War II, I taught all of those pilots how to fly. So if you would just settle down and calm down, I will see if I can get this big motherfucker off the ground. Whoa. You talk about black humor.
Can you cut that from the video?
I am.
Cut that from the video.
What do you say?
You cut that from the video.
No. That's what happens, is that we don't really understand the griots, and we never understand the stories that they tell us in joke form, right, whatever, which the story is so clear for all of us to truly understand that in order to even be, this particular pilot, you had to have all those degrees behind. We understood it when we came along that you could not, do what you wanted to do unless you were the best, and the better, and the best, and the better. But I'd like to begin, my dear brother, by saying a couple things. In her lectures and speech of acceptance upon the award of the Nobel Prize for Literature in December 1993, Toni Morrison begins, once upon a time, there was an old woman, blind, wiser. In the version Miss Morrison notes is this: the woman is the daughter of slaves, black, American and lives alone in a small house outside of town. Her reputation for wisdom is without peer and without question. One day the woman is visited by some young people who seem to be bent in disproving her clairvoyance and showing her up as the fraud they believe she is. Their plan is simple. They enter her house and ask the one question, the answer to which rests solely on her difference from them, a difference they regard as a profound disability, her blindness. They stand before her and one of them says, "Oh woman, I hold in my hands a bird. Tell me whether it is living or dead." She does not answer, and the question is repeated. "Is the bird I am holding alive or dead?" Still she does not answer. The old woman's silence is so long the young people have trouble holding their laughter. Finally she speaks, and her voice is soft but stern. "I don't know," she says. "I don't know whether the bird you are holding is dead or alive, but what I do know, that it is in your hands. It is in your hands." And what we must remember at this conference, that finally it is in our hands. You know, I don't know if the history of our dear brother Amiri, you know, as we watch the television, you know, and we go back in time and relive old time and have to place it in our time and advance new time. But what I do know, that it is in our hands. It always has been in our hands. And what Brother Baraka was really talking about is that from the very beginning, in the South, if it was indeed about a civil rights movement, or in the North, when it was about Black revolutionary thought, it has been in our hands, and it must continue to be in our hands. What we know was that then it was in our hands, and now it is in our hands. So whatever question we begin to answer, or what we really want to take away from this conference, is that it is still in our hands, you know, this change that must come, that we really must begin to understand that in no unreal terms, that it is in our hands to affect this change. And it doesn't mean some slogan that we have, you know, about whose life matters or not. What it really means is that we have to bring the history and history to it at this particular point. You know, we must not involve ourselves with words that people can take and put on the television and say, television lives matter. You know what I mean? You know, white lives matter, you know, whatever. What matters is that at some point we take this information that we gather from these brothers and sisters who've gone before and put it in some kind of context that at some point begins to make us truly understand where we must go. So I think, you know, it is always so important that we understand that, to me, when Baraka sent out the letter to all the artists in the place called New York City, and he asked people to come and help begin to continue the work of Malcolm, you know, that was the central point. He said to continue the work of Malcolm. You know, he didn't say begin again, whatever, but continue the work of Malcolm. And people flooded that building there on Lenox Avenue. We began to understand that the people came, some of us were different. Some people came from the village with the idea that, you know, we are indeed socialists, you know what I mean, whatever. Some people came with the idea is that I'm a cultural person, I write poetry, and I want to effect change. Some people came with a school person mentality. I want to do a program on Saturdays to teach our children what they're not getting in the schools. But they merged together, and they came together. And no one, it's not said often, but one of the things that happened to some of us, Bob Hamilton's wife, Barbara Hamilton, forget the other sister's name, we were put in there to write a program, to write a proposal, to get money from HARU, to begin a Saturday program for the children in Harlem. And we would sit in that building to do that. And one day, the Patterson brothers came in, right? And they came in with guns and says, come on, you bougie bitches, Well, no one had called me a bougie bitch, you know what I mean? Whatever. And so come on down. And we were brought down to the middle floor. And they put the guns down very dramatically on the table. Bang. We're going to really teach you about revolution. Well, we sat there, and I remember looking, and a strange thing happened. I remember my grandmother. I said, what is Mama doing in a place like this, right, I remember she said, at some point, that someone can do something to you once, and it happened again, like a month later. Someone can do something to you twice. If it happens a third time, it's on you. whatever. And there we were in a place with people with a gun, aimed at us, saying simply, I'm going to teach you true revolution. And I remember we complained to Bob Hamilton and to Baraka, Leroy Jones at the time, and other men. And finally, we 3 women had to meet outside in the park and sit to finish that program, to get the money from Haru. I'm saying on some particular point from the very beginning, this was not an easy thing. If you really listen to what Baraka was saying, that was influence, a great influence from the nation. His talk at that point. He had not begun to really develop what we see later on. The ideas that he finally came to in terms of making a move to talk about our freedom, how we were going to do this kind of thing. But what I do know at some point, that many of the people who were in there with him and some of the other brothers and sisters, I know it was at that place that a woman by the name of Max's wife, Abby Lincoln, came in and one Sunday afternoon and spoke to us about who will revere the black woman. What was noticeable about that is that it was always the black man, the black man, the black man, the black man. What was noticeable about us is that we began to talk about the black woman, the black woman, the black woman, the black woman, and what we were going to contribute, whatever. Abby came in and talked about that. We looked at this beautiful black woman and we wanted to become her. We wanted to be this woman. We wanted to be all the things. And we wanted to also repeat what she said about who will revere the black woman. In the midst of this struggle that we're in, who finally is going to hold her very close and dear to their hearts, whatever. And I'm saying finally at some point that as we looked at that and we began to write, in another voice. Many of us began to write in another voice. It was not the repetition of what the men were saying, but it was a woman's voice. It was a female voice that came out, a female voice that began to talk about the plays that we were doing, a female voice that began to say simply at some point, hey, look, this is important, you look at us. And then we at some point will break away because the demise of the Black Arts Repertory Theater was very apparent at that point to many of us, and we began in no uncertain terms to begin to back away from it, to begin to continue to write and end up in a place called San Francisco to begin Black Studies,
Right.
And that was an amazing moment, from Black Arts Repertory Theater to Black Studies. And who are the people we call on? Baraka to come in and do the theater part, whatever. And the brothers and sisters in SNCC, because they were the educated class. You got to hear that. To come and teach the courses with us also, too. The courses that will, in a sense, invade a place called the university life, a place that we began to talk to the people about. These students need to come. They need money to come, so you got to give them money to come. Courses that Kay Ball, my dear friend, would write about, that we would sit in the class and begin to ask young writers, young Black writers, to tell their story. Their story, right? Not America's story, but their story.
So,
Right. So,
I want you to swing back if we're going to do the
before you say, I just want the panel and every folks to know is that class is changing, so
Yeah.
we're going to have people coming in and out.
We figured
So
it
don't
might.
be, so don't be.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, of
We've
course,
done
of
that
course.
all the
Yeah.
time.
All right, John, go right ahead, please.
Yes. Usually Professor Jordan threw our sequence off a bit. Usually, as we point out, that Jim and I are the Pips and Sonia's Gladys Knight. So usually the Pips do the background before Gladys does the solo, but that's okay. And if you've been in the church, after somebody takes the audience in a certain place, you got to start slow and low so you can get them back again without making yourself look silly and competing with the minister. And so I want to take it back a bit to since we're talking about the South, historically Black colleges, and go back and talk a bit about Howard University a little bit. The more I listen to younger people and people who didn't grow up in the Jim Crow world, and who think that because you're at University of North Carolina, that therefore somehow this is better than Howard University, or you can't be bothered with going to historically Black college. that there's never, ever been a gathering of black intellectuals, male and female, in any place on this planet greater than the gathering in Howard University from the 1930s to the 1960s. You know, everybody you studied as the foundation of black intellectual thought in the late 20th century. You know, political thought, social thought, library work, you know, art, you know, or at Howard University. I can say that with great, you know, pride because my mother was on the faculty at Howard University. And when she came on the faculty, she was in the School of Education. And if you're a little kid, you walk into her office and you see she's preparing people to go teach in the Washington, D.C. schools. And so who is she using to integrate Alice Deal High School in music but Roberta Flack? And who is she sending out to teach 6th grade, you know, in elementary school? Toni Morrison. Right? And who's in the music department is going to go teach bass? We're talking about Eddie Jones, who played with Count Basie. Right? So we're not talking about chump change here and some poor Negroes scratching their heads so they can get into a white school. Howard was the capstone. It was the capstone. Howard, not Harvard. Howard, not Harvard. And that's where Baraka came from. That's where Baraka was still in his work. And despite the complaints, and everybody that grew up on Howard's campus complained about it. You know, Frazier was the leader of the complaints, my favorite older person, you know. But Baraka sent his son, Ras Baraka, to Howard. If it was all that bad, why would he send his son there? I sent my son to Howard. If it was that really, you know, kind of the heartbeat of the bourgeoisie, why am I sending my kid there? Right? Because there are two things going on at Howard. Of course they're training you, right, to understand the white world. That's the world where the power is, right? But they also know that they're failing to do that because you're turning out radicals and revolutionaries every 5 minutes, and none of them ever got expelled. None of them ever got put on probation. Nobody ever shut down SNCC when they organized NAG on Howard's campus, and people were coming in and out of jail. And Mordecai Johnson got the faculty to bail them out. Right? Nobody ever said, Amiri Baraka, don't use that language on our campus. You know, it was a safe space for young black radical people. And of course you had to have a middle class veneer. Mordecai's job as a Baptist preacher was to go down there and con white people into not shutting the place down. So of course he would talk about, I'm just a poor little country boy from Texas, and what do I know about it? And my God, help my little school, and there's these crazy Negroes up there, and unless I get more money for the medical school, the radicals gonna take over, so can we have a bigger budget for Howard? Who gets the bigger budget? E. Franklin Frazier, Abram Harris, Bob Martin, who's in the law school, Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston. These are hardly bourgeois sellouts. Right? Hardly bourgeois sellouts. And that's Baraka's in that group. Right? And I saw him before I knew who he was as a person, because I'm young. We used to joke with him. He used to call me his grandfather, but in fact, I knew him when I was in short pants, when I would walk across the campus from school, and you could talk to anybody on Howard's faculty. They were wonderful people, but there was that group of people that we were intimidated by because of their intellect, and that was Leroy Jones and Percy Johnston, right? And they wore berets, and they were always reading French books in French. And they had scarves around their necks, and they smoked these funny-looking dark cigars with some kind of French name. And they muttered to each other in deep thought. And so you didn't want to get embarrassed by walking up and saying, isn't that Leroy Jones? Yeah, man, they deep, man. Whoa, man. Everybody was like, whoa. You know, we knew they were important. But you go down to Coffee and Confusion to hear them read poetry, which is down on K Street. Got shut down. The police shut it down because black people and white people reading poetry was somehow going to upset Western civilization. So they shut it down, right? In that context, the people that Amiri writes about, you know, in his eulogies, in his poetry, are homages to the people from that world. So he has this beautiful eulogy to Owen Dodson, right? People talk about, well, black arts and black power was homophobic. Owen Dodson was gay. The gay black man. He headed up the theater department. Right? The only way that affected anything was that at least one play a season, the lead had to go to one of Owen Dotson's boyfriends. And we used to pray to God that the person could act. Because upon occasion, they couldn't. And you would have to sit through, and I remember when I was about 10 years old, sitting through Hamlet, where the brother had a wonderful outfit on, but threw himself on the ground to being or not to being. And my mother said, "Go to sleep, we got to get out of here." And my sister and I said, "No, we liked it." And I said, no, go to sleep. So we put our heads down. She said, "Kids got to sleep. I got to take them home." And everybody said, "I wish we brought kids." No. Nobody ever fired Owen Dotson because he was gay. Nobody ever said that Elaine Locke could not be the dean of arts and sciences, who was there when my mother came there. He was the dean. Everybody knew Elaine Locke was gay. Nobody said nothing about that. So what? So what? Right? Put that stuff on somebody else. You know. Don't talk about the way black people act within themselves. Nobody ever told my mother she didn't have work to do because she was a female. She showed up at 29 and was a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Negro Education because they needed every living, breathing soul and body they could get with a brain, and gender didn't matter. Right? Gender didn't matter. You know, that's the world in which you grew up in. So you walk into the library, it's Dorothy Porter running the Moreland Spingarn collection. There's no women running any research collections anywhere in the world, except black people. Jane Hudson up there at the Schomburg and Dorothy Porter at the Moreland Spingarn. There are no white females running no research libraries.
Okay. All right, so
Let me give you one more.
Oh, you got another one?
No,
Okay,
I got a couple.
you
I'm
just
going to
warming
roll
up.
into.
Okay,
I'm going to
all
roll
right.
the way he gets, because this gets you into.
We
Because people
good.
got confused last night with this film. He's coming out of that because Frazier and anti-colonial movement are calling us out. You know, we are the new middle class, right? And what you didn't want to do once you read Frazier's Black Bourgeoisie was, in fact, not to be in the second volume of Black Bourgeoisie. Right? And so you had, literally, I mean, because Frazier's like, he's right there with you, because I have an autographed copy of Black Bourgeoisie, you know, signed by Frazier, and you go home and read it, and you say, "Dr. Frazier, are we really this bad?" He said, "Yeah." And you said, and you're looking down saying, "I got my floor-time shoes on, I got my Dobbs hat, I'm thinking about the party, I'm watching the ladies walk by." He said, "No, you gotta do better than that." So we had to move, the middle class, this is us, you know, better than everybody else. We had to move to be better than that. And Baraka is one of those people that led us in that transition. So when you see Dutchman and all that, that's the conflict that we're coming out of. We weren't bohemians because we read French literature. Everybody read French literature, because if you took French at Howard, you had to read Baudelaire and Baudelaire. That's what's on the syllabus. That's the syllabus. It's the syllabus. Wasn't nothing esoteric about that at all. That's the syllabus. You know, and so when you break out of that, you know, and that's how we get to, you know, get fast to the Black Arts Movement. It's as the movement hits, as the Civil Rights Movement, which starts on Howard's campus, Nag, Snick, you know, Mike Delvaux, Stokely Carmichael, you all come out, Cortland Cox, you know, Ivanhoe Donnelly, they all come out of Howard. You know, Gloria House, you know, Ruthie White, y'all Howard University students, the middle class, right? Once you get to that movement, and then you have Malcolm coming, because Malcolm is the voice that's off camera and all these things. You know, like, you know, Malcolm is there, but he's not there. Then Malcolm tells us who we are. You know, then the music goes from Cool Miles, three-piece suit button down, to Coltrane, who's turning your head upside down and say, "Oh my God." Right? That's how we begin to make that transition. And what we did when we did this book, right, was to try to capture that, begin to capture that movement. But it's a conflicting, contradictory movement. It's not a straight line. It's not a straight line at all. Because we have in our heads Western thought, and the best of Western thought. We have the best of Black bourgeois thought, you know, Dunbar, Sterling Brown, Phyllis Wheatley, you know, Margaret Walker, Gwendolyn Brooks. But we also, we want to get past that, beyond that, out into something new, something black. And when you see that Baraka movie, he's almost got to that point. He's not quite there yet. Right? You see it coming. You know, you hear Malcolm's echo of voice, but not the strong Malcolm voice. You know, that comes later after Malcolm's dead, because Malcolm's still alive when they're doing that. Right? You get the strong Malcolm after Malcolm's dead, because Amiri, what he does is he picks up Malcolm's mantle, right? And says, Malcolm is not here anymore. We got to do this without him. But we know what to do, because he laid out what the task was for our generation. And he picked it up, and that's what Sonia was talking about when he called people to come to Harlem. He said, I'm leaving the village. That's the Dutchman. He's saying goodbye. I'm going to Harlem, right? And it's a conflicting, kind of movement thing. Well, how do you break with your white friends and all this? This is not easy things to do. You have white friends.
Right.
You have white teachers. You can't just turn around and call them all kind of names. You got to slowly move away from them and say, look, I love you, but I got to go. Got to go. You taught me as much as you can teach me, but I got to read Robert Williams, and I don't really like Dr. King that much. He's too peaceful. I want some, we got to knock these people upside the head a little bit, as Amos Moore says in The Coming of John. And so we got to, like Professor so-and-so, I appreciate what you did, but I got to go. There's no hard feelings. That's the transition that gets us to what this is. And what we're trying to do in the book is to chart that in all its complexities, and all that being polite to calling people a bunch of motherfuckers, right? Because that's not middle class. We don't use that kind of language in public, but we did. We had to, because we're not them no more. It's not yes sir, no sir, first Negro. It's get out of my way, motherfucker. I'm black, I'm coming here. Move on over, I will move on over you, right? That's where we're moving toward, and that's what we're trying to chart here, and it's not simple, it's not easy. It's not a straight line, so it's messy. That's why the book is so big, because we got all the mess in here. We didn't censor anybody. We have people that wouldn't even talk to each other that if they were alive would not want to be on the page next to the next person, right? But they're both in there, And I'll just stop with that.
Okay, yeah, because I do want to mention that the films that you're seeing on the schedule capture him at different eras,
Right.
which is going to be good.
Yeah.
So,
you got to keep that in
and
mind.
if you get a chance, if you go into the exhibition, you see a conversation between him and his daughter, Kelly. Probably one of the last pieces with him in it, and you hear him summing up to some extent, and then you almost see him passing the baton to his daughter in a way. I mean, in that book they talk about, he's in the book, the first wife Hetty's in the book, her sister Lisa's in the book, so you see kind of a gathering of the family in a way.
That's the conflict, because Kelly was in my class at Amherst College when I first came to UMass, and she didn't want to talk about her father.
Right.
She said, I'm Kelly Jones. I said, oh, you have the same name as Amiri Baraka's daughter. She said, that's my father. And I said, oh, that must be, and she said, don't go there. And I'm saying, okay, I didn't know what that was. I mean, I didn't know what that, I wasn't about to say I loved him and he's great, and she's like, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's my name, that's not me.
Yeah.
Right? She's at Amherst College, one of the first group of women to go to Amherst College, along with my sister, and all Peppy, right?
Yeah.
First generation of women, the first, they caught holy hell. Because Amherst College was a male school there. And Kelly was coming out of that world, and she wasn't a Mary. She didn't want to be him.
No.
She didn't want to be him.
But the great thing is that people grow older.
They can't, and she comes back
And
again.
the
She
great
came
thing
back.
that you,
Yeah,
at
she
some
did.
point, as many people did in that movement, ask forgiveness.
Yeah, you come back
You have
again.
to ask forgiveness at some point. And I always say to people, you have to ask forgiveness. You've got to do that, But I'm always so surprised at people that they still have the same feelings they had in the 1960s. I said, how is that possible? How can you still say the same thing that was said in 68? Which is no growth, at all. It's like I was on a panel once about Du Bois, and someone said, the critique was that Du Bois changed. And I said, yeah, because he stayed alive, right, He grew, he learned, he studied, and that's the thing about all of us, you see. And someone said to me, Professor Sanchez, I've seen you over the years. I didn't know you cursed, but I read your poems in here, and you got a couple of poems, but especially the Coltrane poems, and you're cursing. I said, yeah. I said, because at some point in those early days, we really knew that America, had to be called motherfuckers, because they were motherfuckers. You know what I mean? If you watch what last night, that also there's a bunch of motherfuckers still existing at some point. The point is simply that I said one of the things that was tricky, is that we knew at some point that you had to challenge these people, as word warriors. We didn't kill anybody. Okay, people, we didn't kill anybody, but we became word warriors. We said, okay, what's the deal? How can you get young people to listen to what we're saying? So if you would, initially we go and say, hi, my name is Sonia Sanchez, and it's so nice being here with you to tell you about your history. People walked out, you know what I mean? Because they weren't really, young people weren't interested in you coming in saying that. And you got all the facts down, whatever, and they kind of looked at you like, so we learned how to go in and say, hey, how you be? What's happening in the world? Now, we want to talk about some of the motherfuckers running America. They stayed, you know. They took off jackets, you know, and they stayed. That was very real business. And the other thing that we did that some people didn't do is Baraka and Aski and I, you know, were on Lenox Avenue, those bars there, whatever, and we came in the afternoon and said, we'd like to come in and read some poetry. And the bartender said, yeah, you want to come in here tonight and read some poetry? We said, yes, we'd like to. They said, well, okay, it's on you, you know, whatever. And what did we do? We showed up the bar, people are smoking and drinking and it's loud, and what do? We come in and pull the plug on the jukebox. And then it got quiet, right? Then we looked at each other. What do you do when you pull the plug on the jukebox? You know what I mean? You don't say, hi, you know, I came here to read some poetry to you, whatever. They would push you out. So what did we do? We looked at each other and we said, you know, do a poem like white motherfucker, white motherfucker, white motherfucker, O'Fay. White motherfucker, white motherfucker, white motherfucker, hunky. White motherfucker, white motherfucker, white motherfucker, you know, that whole litany of names. And then the last line, now that it's all said, let's get to work.
Right.
That's a poem, you know, about something else beyond cursing people out. So I'm saying we went from getting people's interest, young people's interest, people in bars, whatever, who went in there to get away from everything, whatever. The next day I'm walking from my father's apartment in Harlem, and I'm walking down the street and the brother said, yo, ain't you that poet? And I said, yeah. I went home and told my old lady, and she was mad because I wasn't there. You see, I'm so serious when I'm saying to you that to have been a poet in a place called America, you know, starting from the 1960s, you know, was to have been a poet that said simply, I would have helped effect this change, you know, in here and in here. You couldn't forget that part either. If you forgot that part, we were in trouble. It was in here and in here also, too. And with the women also, it was in the womb. Because eventually we gave birth during that movement. And at some point we looked at the men and said, hold it, you know, what you're talking about is not encompassing all of us, okay? It's not encompassing the schools. What are we gonna do with the schools? So at some point, you know, we began to get, and also dealing with people in no uncertain terms. You know, I was laughing when John was talking about some things, but I remember in our organization, we learned things. We learned how to take, in a class, bullets out of people's arms. You know, we learned how to rescue people. You know, we learned all those things. But in the middle of having an organization in a place called San Francisco, we also learned that we had a child molester in our midst. The women found that out because one of the children talked about it. So we said in quotes to the men, you got to do something with this dude, whatever, right? And they said yes. And then weeks went by, they didn't do anything with the dude. So then the women went and said simply at some point, if you don't do something with the dude, we'll take care of it. And they said, what do you mean you'll take care of it? I said, well, you know, and one of the women said, oh, very easily, we'll cut it off so he'll never do anything like that again. Then the men did something. Come on. I'm talking about real things that happened to people as they tried to change. This thing called change started out with a person being on the idiot box talking about, you know, for men, for change, what we want to do, and it went further than that. It went to a point called education, where we got students to get money to go to school, where we went into classes, and they said simply, we only taught black students. White students came in, like Asian students came in. I walked into a class, and someone said, Sonia, you need to look at this. What was it? It was a replica of the sign they put up for Japanese Americans to report for concentration camps. I walk into a classroom and I say out loud, look, to my two Japanese Americans, have you seen this? And they said, what is that? I said, we think it's about concentration camps. And they said, for Japanese, they got furious at me. How dare I talk about something I didn't know about, right? So I put it down on the desk, and I continued to teach my class. And we ended it in a circle where we touch each other. They kind of dropped their hands, whatever. But when they left, I said, take this with you, ask your parents. They will return to class on a Tuesday morning. And they will say, my parents told me that they were in concentration camps. My parents had never told us this before, that they said the secrets, the joy about being in this black movement, if you really understand what Baraka was saying at that time, is that when you began to go looking for yourself, you found others. You found Japanese Americans in concentration camps. You found Chinese Americans, in the Midwest banging dynamite into the mountains to build railroads, and exploding in yellows. We found people, Jews in concentration camps that we talked about. We found Chicanos, sitting under a sombrero in movies saying, no, senor, me don't like to do no work. Conchito do the work for all of us, and everybody's laughing about that. What we did is that we found each other. And so therefore that movement of people, of Browns, whatever, during that period was a very real one. We found Native Americans on the Long March and all the people who died. And we found it in San Francisco saying to me, Professor Sanchez, don't stay in San Francisco, or California's going to go under, whatever, get out as soon as you can. I mean, we found other people who had been enslaved also, and they had to come together and meet with us and have us all begin to talk to each other. So this is no simple thing called SOS calling on black people. This book that we talk about encompasses all the things, that went out into the world that began to change people. When we did readings in San Francisco initially, there were 10 people looking at us. And then when they said, what are they doing on stage? Someone said, I thought they was going to sing. They reading poetry. Half of them left, whatever. That was our first year out there. But 1 year later, with going to all these places, being seen, doing things, going on the Idiot Box, at that big music place in San Francisco, what is that place called? Not a music, no, the other one, all the jazz and Fillmore. The place was full. 1 year later, we had a place with nothing but people up in the rafters, whatever, and we had a schedule of Sarah Fabio, Marvin X, Ed Bullins, and one young poet who just died, myself and Baraka. By the time we finished, that house had exploded. There was no ceiling on that place. And what I'm saying to you is that at some point we came from a place called New York City, brought to the black house where Cleaver was living, this whole idea of culture there with the plays and the poetry, and that explosion. And then who will come to San Francisco, this is my head at this point. The brother from Howard, the brother who, the brother from Howard, the brother who took an African name, the brother who married Mary McKeever. That's interesting.
Kwame Ture.
Kwame
Ture.
Kwame will come with the Black Panther thing, and then the coming together of the Black Panther Party and the cultural group in San Francisco will happen and occur. And at that particular point, I will then at some point do the teaching. Okay, my time is up. Okay, close it up. Right. But
see, this is a terrible job to ask you to stop when you're on such a wonderful track. But let me just say one thing. The one thing that happened, we didn't know necessarily what we were doing. Students said to me, "Y'all was so cool and hip." Half the stuff we didn't really know what we were doing, right? And teaching black literature was one. I'm in my house in a place called San Francisco. My landlord would knock on the door, Japanese American landlord, said, "Professor Sanchez, 2 men want to see you." I said, "Fine." They come in and they take out the part, said, "FBI." And I said, "Oh, I live 2 blocks from Haight-Ashbury." I said, "Whoa, something's going on down there." He said, "You're teaching Du Bois." He didn't say Du Bois. Du Bois
Garvey, Wright, Hughes. And I was so naive, I said, yes, I am. You cannot teach black literature without them. And the guy looked at me like, whoa, what's wrong with her, whatever, et cetera. We were teaching people that they had banned. No one taught Du Bois. No one taught Garvey. You know what I'm saying? People, they were all hidden. So when we took them out, we released something, and they would come into my house saying, they turned to my landlord and said, you need to put her out of this house. You know, she's not a radical, she's a militant on this campus. And I remember being so shocked that someone could complain that I was teaching Du Bois, you know, and that's really what happened at some particular point. The anger of America that we had gotten from all the great secrets in America, we brought them forward and we began to teach students.
Actually, you know, that's part of that last question.
I
We were
know.
talking about, you know, okay. All right, so we won't do that last question, but I'm telling you already, we are pushing the worst side of our time. And I'll tell you, the best thing for us to do is probably to move into the next film.
Okay.
You have questions? Okay, let's go ahead and take this
Okay.
question from the audience, and you all can address it that way as we set up in the back.
About the change, and Baraka also used to.
Can you stand up because he's
What
trying
about the
to...
change Baraka also used to? Now, what is the role that Islam plays? Because I recall when you became way close to the issue of Islam.
We all did.
Right, exactly.
There was
We did,
nobody
right,
in
right.
that movement that did not become a Muslim or involved with the
And I
nation.
want to connect that to the language, because I remember by the time you did the day, you would not use any profanity.
It was before even the
But
December
even
day.
moving in
Right.
that direction, so
Yeah.
you made a conscious decision about language, okay? And then also you made a decision about
Spelling.
And how do you do that in terms of young artists today? And how should language be used?
How the language should be used.
Yeah, that's a good way. And then we
Yeah,
can-
the thing with Malcolm cleaned up everybody. The reason, like, I never ever did drugs and I stopped drinking and stuff is because of Malcolm. Malcolm and Coltrane. Coltrane was a drug addict, right? And Coltrane stopped heroin, right? And started to make the most beautiful music the planet's ever heard. And so your motto was like, if Malcolm didn't do it, if Coltrane didn't do it, I'm gonna try to live like them, right? And so you calling people MFs, but you don't cuss when you go to Temple Number 2, man. It's like, that's not cool, And Malcolm used very precise language. He never cussed at all, And so he's trying to get us to kind of like rein it in a little bit because he sees the anger, but Malcolm had this kind of calm. It's kind of, people don't understand Malcolm. People think Malcolm fired people up. He did, but then he calmed you down to focus you.
down.
He said, rage don't get you nowhere. He said, no, okay, I know you're mad, brother, but like, focus it. And what the nation did, at that point in time with Malcolm in there was a way to focus a certain kind of wild kind of anger and to try to channel it. And so a lot of people went in and out of there, like a lot of people didn't stay in the nation. Like Sonia didn't stay long. You go in there and they're straightened up brothers, and then once they get their backbone in, they're standing up again, they clean up, they ain't doing drugs no more, then they come out.
But it was
And they're new
protection
people.
for women.
Yeah.
Because I had said so much
Yeah.
here in this country. I was followed so much.
Yeah.
I was monitored so much.
Yeah.
The one place that I knew that I could then protect me and my children
Is
is
the
that
sanctuary.
there.
Yeah.
I'm very
The
serious
sanctuary.
about that. I'm
Yeah.
very calm about it,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I know when I came in, the brother who was the head of the FOI in New York City made a grand announcement.
Yeah.
What is she doing in here? She's a Pan-Africanist. She doesn't belong here. So I knew my time was numbered, primarily because I taught a class there, and when I taught class, hundreds of women showed up, and I knew my time was numbered then at that particular point, as a professor.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying at some point, one of the great criticisms that I have about a movement, and that's why I really do appreciate the CP, that they protected their children and the children of people who were arrested. When the Rosenbergs were convicted, those children were protected. I saw that.
Yeah. It's still-
Black folks did not protect our children at all. In fact, when our children got into some of those schools before, my kids were hit because they hated me. So I had to put my children in a school where they were not hit. You got to hear that. you know. So you were not only in the movement, but you're in a movement with children who were being hurt, you know, because of the mother at some point. So you had to remove them from a space at some point that they were being hurt. People would come home and finally tell you they were hit, you know, by a teacher. Negroes is what I'm talking about at that point, you see. People who hated your children because they hated you and what you talked about. So at some point during crucial years, a couple of years, you had to give them surcease from that at some point, you know, as you moved on in the world.
Yeah, but also, you know, it turned out, you know, I was in Chicago during those years. Well, you know, it's the center of the nation. And all of the women that lived in the apartment, you know, could get into, they had an apartment building. And very intelligent, sharp black women would join the nation. And they said, it's because we study late, we work late, and it's the safest way you can move to the community. Look, you can, you know, if you wear like your miniskirt and all like that, your afro, brothers will say, what's happening, sister, what's happening, sister? You come by with the garb of the nation on, you say, salam alaikum, right? You say one wrong word to one of them sisters, the fruit of Islam will roll on you and beat you to crap, man. Man, you see, winos will straighten up when them sisters come back. You know, they can't get salam alaikum out, but they try to say it, right? Like, you know, salam la 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 alaikum, right? Because I've seen women walk into the mosque with a black eye, with sunglasses on, and they said, "What happened, sisters?" They said, "Well, my man got upset." They said, "Where is he?" And they said, "What?" I said, "No, where is he?" They said, "Well, he's home." They said, "We're gonna go talk to him." Next thing you see the brother's in Providence Hospital. He got his arm in a sling, and he said, "Sister, you know, if you have any more trouble, let us know." And the brother's apologizing and trying to get his shoulder back in the socket. No, you had this contradictory thing. It's patriarchal, but if you got to move through your community with drugs and alcohol and violence, and you're a lone female or a female with kids moving through the street at night, right? The garb of the nation was armor. Right, because you had this group of people that would roll down and protect you real fast, you know. Right. And so, I mean, it was a refuge in a lot of sense. And then once they got themselves together, of course, they spun out of there, you know. But it wasn't, people hated them not so much because the ideology didn't make any sense at all. That's why I never joined. You know, Malcolm said you want to join. I said, Malcolm, I can't get with this mothership thing, man. This is like, you know. And I like the blues. Like, I'm Chicago. I like Howlin' Wolf and all that. I'm not going to not go to no get me a pig ear sandwich and drink gin and listen to Howlin' Wolf just because I'm black. I said, no, black means to me Mississippi. My people from Mississippi. Right. Like, I ain't giving up Mississippi.
Can I say one thing about the language piece, too, which, you know, I think what John and Sonia said is all true, and it's also to realize that this is a very old discussion, and there's always, I think, a kind of dialectic, especially in this period, if you be good Marxist that I am, about the question of what do you have to do, as Sonia was saying, to grab people's attention to make it immediate, versus trying to reach out to wider parts of the community. So I remember Baraka telling me, you know, he was friends with and a great admirer of Langston Hughes, and Hughes, until he died in '67, was a great supporter of Baraka and a lot of the younger poets, and included him in their anthologies. But, you know, Baraka's saying, he was always saying to me, Leroy, you got to stop all this cursing, because, and he, you know, Hughes was not obviously in no sense a prude, but he's saying, you know, I can't put these in the anthologies because we'll never get them into the schools. We'll never be able to have this stuff in the churches, and if you want to reach the young people, which was really important to Langston Hughes, then we got to figure out a way of, you know, getting the immediacy, but doing, you know, getting that stuff, getting this work in there that young people in the schools, you know, before there's black studies, before there's much anything, especially up north. So, you know, I think that this dialectic of what do you need to reach the broad community versus what do you need to grab certain people's attention right now and speak to them right in the moment is something that goes back before this thing, but is very much of that moment, and part of it is the nation, but part of it also is people like Hughes who really, I mean, Sonia was saying, if anything, I mean, he was in a lot of different things at a lot of different times, but comes out of a kind of, I don't know, you might almost say old left political activist modality. I mean, a lot of, even though he goes back to the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of his style in terms of you know, reaching people is more like I don't know what you would say, maybe popular front, but that, and something that Baraka comes to appreciate much more later in his career as he thinks, I mean, not that he ever stopped cursing, but that, you know, in terms of reaching, you know, the fact that, you know, when his funeral happened, his family has the funeral in the Newark Symphony Hall with all kinds of local Newark people, but his wake is in a Baptist church in the Central Ward.
Right.
And we were wise enough to know that we did not curse. When we went places, you know, I mean, you know, with the poems, we would edit the poems. We weren't crazy, okay, at some point. And so we did not, you know, curse in the church or curse in the schools. We were invited into schools, so we wouldn't come in. The principal would say to you, well, Ms. Sanchez, you know. I said, you don't have to tell me. I won't use a curse word, although you do know your students curse, right? You know, whatever.
Right.
And we wouldn't do it. I mean, because we did want to engage the young people, you know, in this dialogue. And they were so wise anyway and so hip anyway that they would say to you, that's not the way it's written, is it? And you say, no, it's not the way it's written, right? You know, I'll give you a book and you can really read how it's written. But that was the kind of thing that really happened. And, you know, I really meant, I remember what I said about Miss Morrison, you know, and it's in our hands. You know, I'm very serious about this, whatever. That's the thing that we all had to learn finally. You know, we had to learn how you can't chase behind this person and this person or that country or that organization. But finally, wherever you be, you know, it's in your hands, you know, that you are going to teach those students, you know, what they should learn. That I would at some point, when that FBI man would leave my house, I would call Miss Jean Hudson, who had seen to it that I got all these books from Mr. Michaud and Mr. Richard Moore. They gave me every bloody black book on the planet Earth. She sent me to them. And I called her and I said, Miss Hudson, the FBI just said, I'm crying. I said, you know, all I'm doing is teaching black literature. And she said, oh, my dear Sonia, dear, I thought you knew that if you taught some of these people, you might get in trouble. Right. And trouble is an understatement, you know, whatever. Because the trouble that, in quotes, we got into simply was that we opened up the box of worms, the can of worms again, that Du Bois lived and would continue to live, okay? And you had to read him, you know, that all of the, Richard Wright was an important writer, that Langston Hughes was important, and you taught them all the poetry during his later years. Yes, I know about the staircase, whatever, et cetera, whatever, but you taught them all those things about, you know, that Jesus was black, you know what I'm saying? You know, on a cross, and these students listened to it, and we also made them understand that that we taught when we read a Coltrane poem and we said, you know, use the F word, whatever. I said what we did is that we truly listened to Coltrane, and we understand that when he was playing with that horn, he was saying via the horn, F you. You know, but we took the music and put words to it, whatever, et cetera, whatever. Right. And those were the words, and we knew that. And that was the joy, that the kind of release that he gave us to say what we needed to say. I know.
Yeah, we're going to thank this panel. Yeah. Please.